Welcome from Washington, D.C. My name is Brad Pomerance, and we are joined by Jeff Denham. He is a member of the United States Congress representing the Central Valley of California. Sir, it's really devastating to see what's happening in the Central Valley and up and down the state. The drought is so dramatic, so severe. You yourself own a farm, a ranch. You yourself have almonds, or at least you try to have almonds. Talk to us about it.
This will be the biggest drought in our lifetime. It's a big challenge, much bigger than 2009's drought or even the drought of the 70s. This is the first time where we're not only leaving ground go fallow, but we will have hundreds of thousands of acres of trees, of permanent crops, 25-year investment that you're going to see withering away and dying, all because we can't transfer water.
And I want to talk about transferring water for sure, but talk to me about what that means to you, your family, your constituents, the Central Valley, to California.
Yeah, it's not a political issue, it's a personal issue. You know, when you go down the street and you see people that, you know, multi-generational farmers that are losing their businesses, you see people standing in food lines, you see unemployment skyrocketing into the double digits, and even some areas, you know, 30, 40, 50. One city was 60% unemployment last time and could be worse this time. To see that type of devastation when it doesn't need to happen, when we can have the water, when we can store the water, when we can put a priority on our #1 industry and keeping people employed.
So let's talk about storage. It is the issue of the day. It's fair to say that we are at a place right now where we don't have enough storage, and it's causing tremendous frustration. Where do we stand on the question of storage and building new storage? A future solution, we'll talk about current solutions, but where do we stand today on future storage?
We have to have the will to do it. I mean, all new storage is user pay. So if you're going to take the water, if you're a city taking the water, if you're a farmer taking the water, you're going to pay for that new development through a bond to be able to increase that infrastructure. I think the most common sense one is Shasta. Meeting with Dianne Feinstein and a number of my colleagues across the aisle, Shasta is not only the biggest opportunity, but it's the one that is, I think, has very little political challenges. But we also have 4 or 5 others that are ready to go too.
And as I understand with Shasta, is it not that it just needs to be expanded? It's not as if we need to start from scratch?
Correct. We just need to raise the existing spillway.
And so Senator Feinstein appears to be on board. How do we get to a place, though, where we're not talking, but we're doing?
Well, we passed our bill out of the House last week. Again, it's not only on short-term conveyance, but long-term storage. We need the Senate to show us their bill, put it into writing, pass it to your committee, send it over to the House, and let's do what Congress is supposed to do and actually work between the 2 houses to come up with a bipartisan, bicameral solution.
So your friends on the Democratic side were frustrated. Whether that's right or wrong, who knows, but they were frustrated about the, quote, relaxing environmental rules in the House bill. Can we get to a place, meaning the Congress, where there's some compromise on this question? Because even Governor Brown, a Democrat, has said he does see a need for some relaxation.
Absolutely. We can have some compromise, but we have to do it with a guarantee of water storage. Right now, you're going to see companies go out of business. You're going to see farmers losing their farms, and you're going to see people standing in food lines just to feed their families. So we have to have an immediate impact on the Endangered Species Act and being able to shift water around in the very few places that we actually have water this year. And this is not only going to affect Valley Farms. You're going to have some cities that have little or no water and need transfers as well, or else for the first time in, I think, our state's history, you're going to turn on the spigot and nothing's coming out.
When we come back, I want to continue this conversation. For our viewers on HLN, I want to thank you so much for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back with Congressman Jeff Denham from Washington, D.C. We'll be right back. So, sir, we've talked about storage, and I think it's fair to say that all sides would agree at some level we need additional storage. What can you and I, though, do today? Storage takes time to build.
Right now we need to do conveyance. We need to be able to move water from one side of the valley to the other, from north to south, and actually be able to move it to cities as well. So if we do nothing, the water will be released and it will go out to the ocean. Now some of that will have to happen naturally, but where we can, we need to be able to convey that water to the areas that most need it.
And I believe that the reason we can't do that now is federal regulation does not allow this transfer to happen. I think Governor Brown has asked for a relaxation on that. Can that happen?
It can happen. It certainly takes the will of the governor and then of Congress pushing forward on it.
So
I think it's something that, I think it was a good sign that the president finally visited the Central Valley. I think it was a good sign that the governor, at a very early time frame, declared this a national emergency or a state emergency. Now I think it's up to Congress to act and to come together in a bipartisan solution, but do it quickly. And the biggest challenge here, Congress never does anything quickly, and lives are at stake.
Last year when we met, we spoke about immigration reform, and I was really compelled by your conversation about immigration reform. You talked about it in a very personal way. I know you've been working on immigration reform. You are one of the California Republicans who is looking to get immigration reform off the floor, but you face challenges with your caucus. Talk to us about that.
Well, I believe very strongly this is not something we just need to do, it's something we have to do. So getting both parties to come together and solving such a comprehensive or a multifaceted issue is going to be a challenge, especially when there is no deadline or timeline. I mean, this is something that Democrat and Republican presidents have both failed to acknowledge or failed to tackle over the last 3 decades. But now it is affecting, because it's multi-generational, you have kids that have gone to our schools for 10 plus years, graduating, and now can't get a job. So then what happens to them?
They don't speak the language of their, quote, native nation.
No.
Because they
and have
were
no
brought
home
here.
to go home to. Have no birth certificate from their home country. Were brought here at a very early age. It is something we've got to find a solution to.
So at some point, it seemed as if the speaker may have been interested in at least addressing that issue, the question, we'll call them dreamers, whatever word you want to use, where kids were brought here before majority, it wasn't their choice. Could we see a bill just about that issue get off the floor?
We could, but it is certainly one of those issues that when the time is right, when you're able to bring it up, you need to bring up every single piece. We can't just address a part of immigration without securing our border. We must secure our border. I think not only does our state depend on it, but our country depends on it. But to have economic growth, we have to address the dreamers. We need to make sure that we also have a pathway and a legal process for a guest worker program. We need to address all aspects so that we have a vibrant economy.
There's a question about that pathway to citizenship. President Obama has been very specific that he is looking toward a pathway towards citizenship. When the speaker was talking about reform, he wasn't as keen on that. But the president said, okay, we could discuss that issue, but then there wasn't movement. Do you think movement can be created again on this question?
Absolutely. In fact, I was very encouraged at our Republican conference that we actually released a set of principles. Those sets of principles are very similar to the key principles in the Senate. Now we just need to connect the dots and connect the issues between the two houses.
I want to ask you about your friends in your caucus, because I'm a Californian, you're a Californian. We understand the immigrant community and their desire for immigration reform. But in so many of these states, immigration is just not top of mind. Mm-hmm. And so, when they go back to their districts, no one's clamoring for immigration reform.
No.
And so how do you talk to those folks, your friends, in your caucus about this issue? Because it's got to be a challenge for them.
It is. In some areas of our country, the immigration issue is not a top tier issue for them. So getting them to understand why it's important to our national economy, why it's important to our social welfare system, why it's important to overall our entitlement system. If you're going to get rid of the $17 trillion worth of debt, you have to have an immigration solution. I mean, those are all issues that we talk about.
The CBO has said such, the nonpartisan
$1 trillion,
right,
according to the CBO.
Mm-hmm. So as we move forward, you just got to keep persevering? Is that the goal?
Absolutely, and really talking about the human aspect of this. I mean, when you really start talking about details and you start talking about the kids that were brought here to no fault of their own, we've never penalized kids for the challenges or breaking the laws of their parents. Yes.
His name is Jeff Denham. I'm Brad Pomerance. Thank you for watching from Washington, D.C.
According to the Pew Center, Mexican nationals make up the largest portion of immigrants in the United States. What countries' nationals come in second? China, El Salvador, Guatemala, or India? The second largest immigration population in the United States comes from India.
It's California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, and we are coming to you from Sacramento. We are joined by Maienschein. He is a member of the California State Assembly, representing significant portions of San Diego, and one of your colleagues also from San Diego. Her name is Toni Atkins. She's slated to be the Speaker of the State Assembly.
Yeah.
First San Diegan in the history of this great state. How do you feel?
It's great to have somebody from San
Right.
Diego. I'm excited for Toni. Obviously, her and I served together for 8 years.
And explain for our viewers that are not from San Diego.
On the San Diego City Council, we were both elected at the same time, served our 2 terms together, so we had a great opportunity to work together.
Sure.
Became friends and got a lot of things done in a bipartisan manner.
Right.
And particularly on the area of homelessness, we work together, but obviously when you have a city the size of San Diego, there's literally thousands of issues that come up. So had a great opportunity to work with her and excited for her.
And let's talk about homelessness. You, after you left the San Diego City Council, you were the commissioner for homelessness in the entire county of San Diego, a very large county. And you were there actually during some very tough times. I think it was 2008 to 2012, is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah, and those were really tough years for our state and for San Diego County. Talk to us about what you saw as the commissioner, and then we'll talk about a bill you're proposing.
Yeah, I mean, as you saw the national kind of economic meltdown, certainly a state economic meltdown where budgets were being slashed and people losing their jobs, it was really a rough time, and the numbers for homelessness increased. And we were able to do a lot of work to actually get those numbers down. I created a program called Project 25, which was hugely successful in reducing chronic homelessness in San Diego County. We're very proud of that, and had a lasting impact on the lives of those individuals.
Being that San Diego County is on the border, does that complicate homeless issues? I don't know the answer, so.
I wouldn't say it being a border city really complicates it. What I do think complicates it, it's a big city, and so homelessness is a complicated problem. It's not just you can't just have one silver bullet that fixes homelessness. It really has to be something that takes into account education, takes into account jobs, takes into account mental illness. Substance abuse. I mean, you go through all of those things, affordable housing, all those things play into it, so it's very complicated to address.
But there is one area where you're working to try to solve at least a small issue with Speaker-designate Atkins as well as Assemblywoman Quirk Silva. And it deals with identification for homeless. And it's a problem we wouldn't intuitively realize, but it exists.
Well, one thing that I found is when I was the Commission on Homelessness was how important just having a simple ID card is. And a huge percentage of the homeless population don't have an ID card because they had it out in their stuff and their stuff was taken from them or thrown out, or they left their things that are on kind of the side of the road or in a bush somewhere. They left them and they came back, it was gone. So it's very difficult to get an ID to these individuals. And as we all know, living in society today, without an ID card, you can't do anything.
And presumably they don't have an address.
Right.
So what address do you put on any ID?
So now what we're going to allow them to do is to list being homeless, because it's just addressing the obvious, right? They don't have there's not a street address to give to a homeless person, obviously. So we're allowing that to be listed on the application because we want them to have the ID card because that allows them to start getting integrated. That allows them, if they need certain benefits, that allows them to do that, but ultimately allows them, and that's how you go get a job, right? You have to turn in an ID card when you apply for a job. All those things, you need an ID card first.
And also a fee waiver?
Yes, and also a fee waiver as well through the DMV, something that, again, I think is appropriate, addresses what really is the obvious there. We want to start getting them mainstreamed back into society, get them working.
When we come back, I want to talk about another element of the homeless. Many often face this, and that is the question of human trafficking, the devastating question of human trafficking. For our viewers on HLN, I want to thank you so much for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back with Assemblyman Maienschein. So, sir, let's talk about the scourge that is human trafficking. And being a border city and county is actually an element of the human trafficking problem. Talk to us about what you see as a representative from San Diego and also as the former commissioner of homelessness in San Diego.
It's heartbreaking. I mean, you see particularly some of these teens who are homeless teens who are out on the street. They've run away from home somewhere in the Midwest maybe. They come to San Diego.
Sunny, beautiful San Diego.
Great weather. They've seen it on TV. So they come to San Diego and they're exploited. There's pimps who immediately start preying on them, know where they congregate. They're minors. and they come in there and they make their troubled lives significantly worse.
It's interesting you mentioned the Midwest, because I think so many folks believe that those that are trafficked into America are foreign nationals, but it's not the case. Of course, some are,
Yeah.
but a huge number are domestic.
A huge number are coming from other states in the country. So you're exactly right. There's a huge number that's also coming from other countries too, and that's equally awful. And either way, we need to go after the individuals who are profiting off this, who are making these troubled teens and adults, making their lives really a living hell.
So let's talk about the challenges with the law as it relates to human trafficking. I think it's fair to say that the laws do a decent job dealing with the pimp.
Yeah.
There is some question about how they deal with the victim. I mean, I know there are some counties that still deem the trafficked perpetrators of prostitution.
Right.
Some counties are looking to change that, where they see the perpetrators, the victims, as to victims. But then there's the question of the John. What does the law look like today as it relates to the John who hires the trafficked?
Well, essentially, you're exactly right, Brad, there. Is essentially the John can be charged with a crime if he's caught in the act with the prostitute,
trafficked,
right?
Well, but that's the key, the prostitute.
Exactly. And so it has to be specific to an actual crime occurring. What we're trying to do is say, look, this is more complicated than that. These people really are perpetuating human trafficking. I mean, that's really what's happening here. So we're expanding the tools for law enforcement to get involved and go after the other group of people who are really driving this problem.
And that's the John.
Exactly.
And so what are you trying to do is allow the Johns to be charged with trafficking?
Exactly. Because, again, that's really what's happening here. Yes, is there something that's a crime being committed? Of course. But that's pretty basic. What we're trying to do is address what's really happening here.
And I would presume that for many of those that are being trafficked, it is obvious that they are trafficking victims. This is not just your run-of-the-mill prostitute, if I can use that very loose term. I mean, these women are being brought in because they appear young, they appear whatever they are. And so these Johns should know.
Well, these women are being sold, if they're coming from other countries, they're being sold a bill of goods that they're going to come here and they're going to get these jobs, or they're going to get this. And of course, they get over here and they find something totally different. Or, like we said earlier, they're coming from some other place in the country to sunny San Diego, sunny California, and then when they get here, the truth is awful different.
Does your bill address the victim? I'll call her or him the victim. Because I recently spoke with, I think it was the district attorney for Los Angeles County, I can't remember, but I believe she said that she is looking at changing the way the victim is charged, because right now these trafficked can still be charged with prostitution.
Right. And I think that's where this is progressing. I think it has to be looked at on kind of a more holistic approach. Yes, certainly are there some people who are trying to commit a crime and trying to, of course, but there's also a huge percentage that they're victims themselves. They're not there to commit a crime or perpetuate crime. They're there because they're being forced into this by a pimp or by someone else and by their conditions, and they're there really unwillingly.
And what about the border issue? I mean, obviously this is a state bill, so we'll go all the way up to the Oregon border, but it's hard to deny that San Diego is ground zero for a good portion of this trafficking coming in from Central and South America.
Sure.
How do you handle with the border issues?
Well, absolutely. I mean, anytime, I think for any city that's along, or county that's along a border, I mean, that's where people have got to cross at a border, right, to get into America. For the population that's coming from other countries. Again, as we said earlier, there's still a population that's coming from inside the country.
Yes.
But, and that's a very real issue. And because San Diego is located where it is, we've always had border issues that we've had to deal with.
At the same time, this would increase penalties, and right now, California's trying to decrease its prison population because of court order. So do you see this bill moving forward because of those pressures?
I do, because I think this is something that's so important, that I just think that there's going to be a groundswell of support for this, because people do realize that this is something, clearly is this a problem in San Diego? Right. Yeah, but this is a problem really statewide.
He's Brian Maienschein, member of the California State Assembly. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's California Edition.
From 2010 to 2012, what percentage of human trafficking victims identified in California were American? 27, 44, 56, or 72%? 72% of human trafficking victims identified by the state of California were American citizens.
It's California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are coming to you from Sacramento. We are joined by Curt Hagman. He is a member of the California State Assembly, also a candidate for Board of Supervisors in San Bernardino. And sir, we've been speaking about education over the last few months. You've been talking about computers in classrooms. Now you are working with one of your fellow Assembly members, a Democrat, on the question of whether a bond should be placed on the ballot in November that would support education facilities. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, thanks, Brad. Great to be here. Ever since 1998, the state has been in a partnership with local districts, matching funds to build facilities or rehab old facilities.
I see.
It's a much better way, actually, than it used to be the old system. Every district was relied on the South to redistribute the new growth areas and the old areas to not growth to kind of balance that out. And the state has a desperate need to make sure we have great K-12 and great community colleges for the future. We expect it to grow by another 50 million in the next 30 years.
No doubt.
And so there's going to be a lot of this going on. So more it stabilizes it, it kind of keeps it even and across the state and allows us to be a part in partnership with these districts.
One could argue that now couldn't be a better time, given that you look at some of these public schools and they're built in the 70s and they look like they've been built in the 70s.
Well, there's a lot ones even longer than that.
Right.
That has. We've actually spent quite a bit of money since this program in 1998. The state part has leveraged another 3 times as much in local bond funds, but there's always a lot more work to do. And basically, there's a big deficit for 40 years before that. If you lived in a newer area, you had a new school. If you lived in an older area, you had a very old school. And now we're talking technology upgrades and everything else for all these campuses as well. And we have also the Prop 39 dollars that's coming in for energy efficiency.
That's right.
So it's a good time to partner up.
Now, a bond like this, would it need 2/3 or 50+1?
To get it on the ballot,
get it on the ballot
We're
is-
putting it on the ballot. So
Right. But what about in November? Do the voters need to pass it with
there's
2/3?
50+1, I believe.
Right.
on
I
that.
think you may be right because it's for schools, and I know
Correct.
there's a lower threshold.
Correct. The big question is whether or not the governor wants it on the ballot in November.
And that's the question I wanted to ask you, because as we speak today, one could argue it's likely there will be a water bond on the ballot. Democrats and Republicans are both proposing water bonds. And without talking about the particulars of the water bond, you know, California voters have been generous when it comes to bonds, but you start loading up bonds.
Absolutely.
And it could be that they just get bond fatigue and they vote no on everything.
Well, the reason why we haven't had one in the last 6 years
Right.
is because the voters haven't had the appetite for that. I think this year the drought, and I voted for the water bond 6 years ago to put
did,
it out.
yes.
But we also voted to take it off for every 2 years.
did.
Because the climate wasn't there. I think with the drought being very much in the news forefront, it may be a good time to go after that as well. These are very expensive projects on both sides. And most of the voters don't realize, hey, if we get the bond passed today, we're going to have water for another 6 years. It's the first time the project comes through.
Right.
So we have to think ahead. And we do have a lot of debt in the state. And I understand that, you know, and appreciate the governor being fiscally conservative right now. And so it is a
would've
judgment
thunk?
call.
Yeah, who would have thunk? But at the same
We can
time,
exchange to high-speed rail money for that. and then
okay,
good.
we could talk about that as well. But at the same time, you know, we think about in 2012, the voters did pass Prop 30, which was an affirmative increase on their taxes. And yes, drought is on the mind of voters, so one could argue, you know, it's a perfect storm, forgive my cliche, to
Yeah.
put a water bond on the ballot. But what about an education bond? You know,
It actually pulls higher than the water right now, which,
kidding.
yeah, I don't understand why, but everyone loves education. We all see the school and the need, and, you know, you have kids in school, so do I.
right, yes.
It's part of our life, our focus to make sure they have a good education, and we're still at the bottom level of that. We want to make sure they have good facilities and modern facilities to learn the best that they can, and so I think that's why it still pulls very well.
Do we have a sense as to how the money will be allocated K-12 versus upper higher ed?
We had a certain bond amounts last time that was segregated between community college and K-12 and certain pots of money for rehabilitation as far as and new schools as well. We haven't put any numbers in this bill yet
So
because
we'll
we
see.
want to make sure we get the administration's
Buy-in.
blessing. Yeah.
When we come back, I want to continue a conversation, speak more about prison realignment. For our viewers on HLN, thank you so much for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, sir, let's continue our conversation, and I want to speak about realignment. You yourself work in the law enforcement industry, or have, at least prior to your service in Sacramento. And we know that the governor has been hammered over the last few years by the federal courts as to the size of the prison population. We know that some could argue miraculously, the administration has been able to get an extension of time to contract the size of the prison population. There was a serious fear that the courts were going to require early release. That being said, We do have a program known as Realignment, which changes the way people serve their time and where they serve their time. You're running for the Board of Supervisors, and we know that counties have taken the brunt, if I may use that term, of the realignment scheme. Lower level offenders are serving their time in county facilities as opposed to state jails.
Correct.
You wrote an op-ed recently about realignment. Talk to me about your views.
Well, I haven't supported the realignment from the beginning.
You have not?
Have not. Before 109, before AB 109, the realignment bill, an average inmate would stay in county jail for 3 months,
Right.
either serving a sentence or going to court. Now you have the average of about 5.2 years in LA County. I don't have the numbers out of San Bernardino County yet.
It's interesting you say that because the intent had been that those that would serve time in county jail would serve 3 years or less.
Correct.
But you know better than I, because of enhancements, the times have increased.
Correct.
And so county facilities, which really weren't meant for long-term stay, are resulting in long-term stay. I know there have been moves by former State Senator Bill Emerson, one of your former colleagues, and Riverside DA Paul Zellerbach from your community, near your community, to change that formula.
Correct.
But it hasn't happened.
No. And I'm afraid it's going to get longer and longer. So we take even the 5-year benchmark for our average inmate, and you multiply it by the 4 inmates that you took out for each year, the average being 3 months. Now you're replacing one 109er to 20 pretrial or even lower affected inmates for that one inmate transfer. So those are the people who actually did the crime today, saw the court today, got sentenced today. Those are ones that they're closest to the criminal activity. And there it is, theft, burglary, the assaults, those type of things. So you have no one holding those people back. So our crime rates, and you saw the stats in my op-ed, have gone through the roof.
But here's the challenge. I think most people would agree that there's a lot of frustration behind 109, Democrats and Republicans and the governor. But the courts really do hold the cards here. And the prison population has to decrease somehow. It had to decrease, and it did, and it needs to continue to decrease. Or we're just going to see the courts say, open the doors, out you go.
It was a state problem. I believe it should have stayed a state problem. We should come up with solutions on the state level. The county jails were not meant to be taking long-term medical, long-term elder care,
Right.
all those different things. Now, the county hasn't even absorbed all the medical costs for taking care of those inmates. And then how about the ones they released early, because they also have to take care of those prices.
So that begs the question. It's a state problem. The problem, though, is that the state doesn't have enough prisons.
Correct.
And we haven't built prisons for, I think, over a decade. I believe money has been set aside. I think it was
For county jails, correct.
Yeah, for county jails, but also for prison construction. Back in 2007, $7.4 billion set aside, but Governor Brown canceled the bond sale in the middle of the downturn. There is some money proposed in this current budget for prison construction, but $500 million.
Mostly what we're looking at is which I support, is a medical prison, because the medical costs are so high. So bring all the people who need daily or weekly medical care in one place.
Right, I think that happened. Didn't it happen?
Yeah, we did a
San
north,
Jose
we're looking
or
for a south
whatever
one
it
as
is?
well. So that's what that money's for, not really capacity issues. Yeah, I'm open. I'm a Republican saying we need prison sentencing reform. I'm open to look at those who've been in prison for 30 years. Are they less a risk to society than those who just committed a crime yesterday? Even if it's more of a violent, because they're in their 70s now? Maybe. Those are things we need to look at. And other states have seemed to be able to do that. We also need to look at, hey, are we increasing population? Maybe we need to increase capacity as well. I think there's a number of solutions, but to redefine the whole system without really airing that in the public. It was one of those last night, in the middle of the night leadership deals that we all voted on. I think it's a poor way of doing it. I think we're seeing the outcomes.
It's interesting you mentioned that you're a Republican that would be willing to look at sentencing reform, and there are Democrats that are willing to look at prison construction.
Yeah.
And so, can the parties get together on those two issues?
I hope so. If you look at my record in the last 5, 6 years, I must have put in probably 9 or 10 reform type of bills for tools. If the sheriffs have all this population, I think they should have more tools. I think we should go back and look at, take our correctional officers' opinion on if this is a bad guy versus a good guy. Maybe let the good guy out early and keep the bad guy in based on performance.
His name is Curt Hagman. He is a member of the California State Assembly running for Supervisor in San Bernardino County. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's California Edition.